second in our review of city services related to domestic violence. And we're going to open it up in a minute to public comment. Before we go, though, we have exactly 2 hours scheduled for this meeting. So we will proceed with our deadline and our time limits in mind. So with that being said, I'm going to call the meeting to order and open it up to public comment. This is a time to comment on any matter not of agenda or non-agenda items, but must fall within the scope of the Billings City Council. There will also be time in conjunction at the end after agenda item 1 for more comment regarding that item. You may speak only once for each item during the meeting. Is there any public comment?
Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Jeff Kettleson. I live in the 5th Ward. Today on the City of Billings main webpage calendar, we're being informed of the Kids Market. The Kids Market is run by a nonprofit. It is not run by the city, and I am not aware that it receives any city funding. Let me be clear, I support healthy kids activities and I support the Kids Market. But what I don't support is that this type of information falls upon our city's main calendar page. One of the things that also is missing from our city's main calendar page are boards and commissions that require legal notices to be placed in the newspaper. Without proper notice to the citizens, we're not guaranteed of transparency and honesty. Specifically, the Billings Improvement District, the Downtown Urban Renewal District, the East Billings Urban Renewal District, and the South Billings Boulevard Urban Renewal District does not show on our calendar. I'm sure this is an overlook. I know for sure that it may or may not meet the Montana public information requirements, but that's another discussion for another day. So in the future, I respectfully ask the council to instruct the administration to include the Billings Improvement District, the Downtown Urban Renewal District, the East Billings Urban Renewal District, and the South Billings Boulevard Urban Renewal District on our calendar so the citizens can be informed. Also, one more final comment. I see that starting on Monday that we will be removing the public comment from the beginning of the meeting concerning agenda or non-agenda items. Now, personally, I like to come and visit you and I like to listen to you, but I'm very concerned about the people that will want to come and talk to you and they'll be forced to wait to the very end. 12 o'clock at night we've been here, and I look forward to seeing you, but I think that that's a bad mistake. Anyways, thank you.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, we'll close that part and move to agenda item 1. Mr. Iflin, you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. So we're just going to pick up where we left off a few weeks ago and just get started right away because of our time constraints here. The next thing on the list is the risk and lethality assessment, and I've got Officer Katie Nash that's going to kick that off, so she can come up here. Since we're kind of in this format today, so Community 7 can pick us up a little better. If you got any support people, we've got obviously this podium, a couple more chairs with mics that we can sit around so everybody can talk and don't have to keep coming back and forth up to the podium and stuff too. So all yours, Katie.
Okay. Is this good? Okay. So I have heard questions about risk assessments or lethality assessments from council members and previous public comment. I really appreciate the inquiry. Risk assessments in domestic violence cases are a best practice. Okay, thank you. So I'm excited to say that that is an item that we can cross off our list. The Billings Police Department has had a risk assessment procedure in place for almost a decade now. We do use the Arizona Intimate Partner Risk Assessment Instrument System, APPRAISE for short. You guys should have a copy of it. So I just to kind of explain how officers use this form, the left-hand side is the risk assessment questionnaire. Victims can choose to participate or not. They are not required to answer these questions. The questions come up at the end of the investigation. So once an officer has either established probable cause or concluded the investigation, then they offer the victim the chance to go through these risk assessment questions. They become a part of the case file, so victims are told that it is discoverable. They can choose not to answer some of the questions. That's completely up to them. The top tier questions are what is scored. And if you flip to the back of your paper, you'll find the scoring information. So elevated risk and high risk. And that just helps our officers help the victims to understand the risk that they may face with the current relationship. So officers would go through the risk assessment, go through the scoring information just for informational purposes. The victim doesn't have to participate in anything after that. Elevated and high risk victims are then referred to the YWCA helpline, which at this, and I can defer to Aaron, the YWCA CEO, for additional information, but at this point, victims referred to the helpline also get a referral to the Family Justice Center kind of umbrella of services. So again, victims can choose to accept the facilitated call to the helpline, or they can say, no, thank you, I don't want to speak to anybody. The other side of the form, the body diagrams, are done in all partner family member assault cases. The risk assessment side is for intimate partners only. It is validated through research on intimate partner violence. So if it's a familial relationship, officers do not ask the questions. They still do the body diagram side of the form always. High risk and elevated risk offenders are also dangerous to officers. So our secretaries will flag those offenders as with an officer caution. So when officers respond back to the address, they know that this person has an elevated or high risk score based on prior risk assessment questions. The city attorney's office, domestic violence prosecutors also use the risk assessment answers to inform their bond arguments. So at arraignment, they go through and tell the judge the victim answered yes to questions 3, 4, and 7, that kind of thing. The judges are allowed to consider risk assessment answers in bond setting. I think that is the extent of this form, if anybody has questions.
Mr. Boyette, then Ms. Shaw.
Thank you. If a person refuses to participate in this form, is that documented somewhere so that the attorneys know that it was offered and the person didn't do it? Whether, I mean, good, bad, or indifferent, just that they didn't do it?
Yes, Councilmember Boyette, Mayor, and Council. The officers would just mark the decline column on that form to indicate that the victim declined any specific questions or the questionnaire completely.
Thank you. This is very helpful. It's helpful to get to see this and learn about it. My question is about the referral process. So you'd mentioned they get a referral to the YWCA helpline and the FJC. Can you clarify how that's working? Because I think that's been an ongoing question of like, who's the first person that's getting the call, and just how does that work practically?
So it is the same services. If it's after hours, if it's any time of day, the officer will help a victim call the helpline phone number, which is answered by the advocate who's working, who's on call. Again, Aaron can potentially answer more if I miss something. If a victim does not need shelter, then that process turns into maybe a referral for additional Family Justice Center services, an intake to talk through what other services aside from shelter the victim might need. So the initial call goes to the advocate that's in the shelter. And if a victim doesn't need shelter or the shelter is full, then they are referred to the scope of services.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Councilman Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned that the once this is filled out and I guess the perpetrator is then considered high risk, and so the officers know that going out. So, but if the form is not filled out, do the officers do anything to kind of make sure that that is notated on the account? Because if the victim's not filling this out, does the officer fill it out to make sure that future calls are marked?
Good question, Councilmember Neese. No, patrol officers have discretion always to flag somebody with an officer caution. So if they're hearing information about suicide by cop threats, something like that, they can always have the secretaries flag somebody with an officer caution. Because this form is discoverable, it can potentially put a victim at increased danger if that victim answers questions and the perpetrator sees that, which is why they have the option to decline. And so it's very important that our officers only answer the questions on this assessment exactly how the victim answers it. So if a victim says, no, the suspect is not constantly jealous, but the information from the interview indicates to the officer, yeah, they seem constantly jealous, the officer will still put no on this form because the victim has a reason for answering in that way. So officers can always mark an officer caution, but it wouldn't necessarily be based on this form. Does that make sense?
It does, but you brought up another point that I'm concerned about. What I heard you say is this form, if a victim answers the form, is discoverable, which would lean the victim not to answer the form because they don't want them to know this. So how do you protect the victim from answering this form and keeping the information confidential from the person who's abusing them?
We officers do not have the ability to do that. Anything that a victim tells an officer is going to be discoverable. That came up during the training for this risk assessment when the Arizona team came to Billings. And based on Arizona's putting this form into practice, they had not seen an issue with the victim saying, oh, it's discoverable, I don't want to do it. They just hadn't had a high number of declinations based on that. And I don't believe that we have seen a high number of declinations based on it being discoverable. So that is potentially an issue. A victim might realize that this might put me in danger, I don't want to talk anymore, which is completely their prerogative, and there's not a way around that. If they give us information, it is discoverable.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lindley?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, a couple of questions. So do you have any idea what the declination rate is? Out of every 100 of these that are attempted to be filled out, what's the declination rate?
Councilmember Lindley, I do not have that information. Myself and the other DV investigator just don't have the capacity to go through. We've looked through these forms to try and collect some data, but we haven't been able to dig in that far. It would be very interesting, but we just don't have the capacity to do that.
Okay, and then one more, if you don't mind. You mentioned that if there's a high risk offender that's flagged, so that flag is on the offender, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then is there anything, you mentioned notes that an officer could use if they're going back to the same location, but what else, if anything, is done differently with that offender? Like, for example, is there a different process when they're going through the release, if they're getting released from jail or anything like that?
That would be up to the discretion of the judges. The city attorney's office can use this form to inform their bond arguments, but the release conditions are completely up to the judges.
Okay, so we don't have any, to your knowledge, no consistency necessarily on that?
We don't have a way to control that, no.
Okay, thanks.
Dr. Nicholson, then Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. A referral's made, and is there, could you describe how the referral's made, and if there's a handoff, is there a warm handoff or anything like that? And how many people, do you have any guess about how many people take advantage of the Family Justice Center referral?
Councilmember Nicholson, thank you. The warm handoff is a very important piece of this. When we first implemented the risk assessment, the grant that the police department gets paid for track phones so that officers would be able to call the hotline, introduce themselves, give the advocate some background information, and then literally hand the phone to the victim to do that warm handoff. That process was not as streamlined as I hoped that it would be. And so at this point, I believe that officers are just having to help victims make the call on their own phone. And so they are instructed to do a warm handoff. Again, without a case assessment of some kind, I don't know how often that is actually happening, but the idea was a warm handoff to say, this is Officer Nash with the police department. I have Jane Doe. She answered these questions, X, Y, and Z, because a warm handoff is very important. I'm sorry, can you repeat the second part of that question?
Is what proportion of people who are high risk take advantage of the Family Justice Center?
Through the phone call referral process? I think that I would have to defer to the YWCA to answer. I don't have that number. Officers can mark the box on this form that says they made a referral, but that could just mean that they offered the referral to the victim. So the actual followed through referral phone calls, I don't have a number.
Mr. Kennedy, then Mr. Boyette.
I have a couple of questions. When I did my ride around and we had a young lady that had passed out and had strangulation marks on her throat, one of the things was that the officers, there was no argument about it. She did not want the boyfriend to be arrested, and there's no argument. What are the no argument and they're automatically arrested for strangulation, and what else do you have? That they're immediately removed and locked up.
Okay, Councilmember Kennedy, if I'm understanding your question correctly, officers have discretion for partner family member assault crimes, including strangulation, the aggravated levels of those crimes. Mm-hmm. The way the statute reads is if an officer has probable cause to believe that the offense has been committed and can identify a predominant aggressor, officers will make the arrest. So we don't need a victim to say, yes, I want to press charges.
So with or without the risk assessment, the discretionary and they automatically move it forward.
Yes.
So the question I have is, Mom that night had children and other folks there. How do we protect then, the boyfriend was taken off and would be there till Monday. How do we work with the mother and those kids and make sure that we can get them in restraining order or whatever for their safety? What do we do? Or do we remove them from the home and you make a referral to the Y?
So many options exist. If the victim and family want shelter, if they feel like the home is not a safe place, maybe the offender wasn't arrested, the officer can help contact the shelter and can transport. If the shelter is full, which unfortunately is a reality, the officers can make arrangements for other safe places to stay. Part of what the victim witness specialists do who work in the prosecutor's offices are to reach out to victims the next business day as soon as they receive the case to kind of talk through concerns, barriers to participating, other needs that victims have that officers cannot address on scene. So the victim witness specialists find those.
If an incident occurred on a Saturday night, then the city attorney's office would not follow up until Monday?
Correct.
Okay.
And if the victim, or at the officer's discretion, if there was the referral made to the YWCA helpline, then that advocate would potentially be able to talk through some additional options. But just within the scope of the criminal justice system, it is the next business day. I can't speak to what the county attorney's office does with their victim witness specialist. I know that our city attorney's office team, highly functioning, they contact victims routinely and talk through some of the barriers that they're facing.
The only thing that I'm trying to get at is that lapse in time that of having either a restraining order or getting help, and when the person is released or not, or out on their own.
Mhm.
So that's the piece I'm concerned about.
If there is an arrest made, there will be a no contact order issued in all domestic violence cases.
Mr. Boyette?
So earlier you said that if an officer, that if the victim says no, they put down no, but during the course of their talking to the person, they go, this is really right. Doesn't the officer do a physical report, type out a report or something that says what they saw and heard and felt anyway? And if that's true, how do you get those two together then? Do you take her, I mean, which side do you take kind of thing?
Councilmember Boyette, that is the very complex nature of these cases. So if, for example, an officer responded to a strangulation call, like Councilmember Kennedy described, clear strangulation marks on the victim's neck, if the victim agrees to answer these questions and then maybe says, has he ever choked, strangled, or suffocated you? If the victim says, no, that hasn't happened, and the officer knows that it has, that information would be in the police report, that the officer observed these things. Maybe the victim's initial statement or the complainant's observations said that, yes, a strangulation happened. The officer can ask the victim, you're saying, no, that didn't happen, but based on my observations, I think that it did. The officer will always mark down on this form what the victim's answer is, but their supplement, which has to go along with every case, or will be a supplement, will describe all of the observations, initial statements, follow-up statements, that kind of thing. So yes, the two things will be present. How you merge them together is case by case. If there are discrepancies, the officer will try to address those. It might be something for myself or my team to address later, the discrepancies. But this form contains the victim's answers only. This form happens at the very end. So once the officer has made an arrest decision and otherwise would leave the scene, that's when this form comes into play. So this form is above and beyond the facts of the current case.
So you've used this form for a long time now?
Yes, so thank you for bringing that up, Mayor. I was going to add that we started implementation with the Arizona team I believe they came out to do their first training in 2017. We began working through an implementation with a multidisciplinary committee in 2018 and rolled out the initial phase of implementation in either late 2018 or early 2019. It wasn't until the 2019 Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission's report to the legislature that they recommended risk assessments as a statewide best practice. We were doing that before that. So it's almost a decade that we have had this in place.
Have you changed it any in the last 10 years?
Aside from switching up the cell phones that are used, no. The risk assessment has stayed the same based on the research, and the form has stayed basically the same.
Are there ways that you'd like to have it improved or changed?
Mayor, that's a good question. The form I'm happy with, just based on my observations and using it. I would love to be able to do case assessments, to watch body cam video, to hear how officers are kind of advertising this to victims, to hear what the declination reasons are, and then to look through and find out maybe what happened during arraignments, if there was a difference between a victim that declined and release conditions and then a victim that answered all the form and those release conditions. I would love to do case assessments, but it comes down to capacity.
Sure. Regarding body cam footage, will the new system that is being put in expedite that for you, make it easier?
I don't think so, because it would still be a person watching the video. We might be able to pull the video a little bit easier, but we would still have to sit and watch it and listen to the interactions, listen to the victim's responses.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor?
Mr. Neese?
One more question about the forum, as he was asking about different things on it. I guess maybe I'm not reading or don't see it, but I don't see where there's an option for where the victim declined the form. So if they decline to do this, does that mean nothing gets turned in the case? Or does a blank form get turned in?
No, thank you for asking that so I can clarify. On the risk assessment questions, the very right-hand column is the decline column. If a victim declines, then the officer just marks that column and the rest of the form gets filled out and turned in. So there won't be yes, no answers, but the form itself will still be turned in.
Okay, so they're going to ask all these questions and the victim would just say a decline, or do they ask if you want to go through the form and they just, no, I'm not going to answer, so they just write decline down through the whole form?
The way that I trained the officers to do it was to explain to the victim, or the investigation is concluded. I have a few more questions if you're willing. They're discoverable. It is voluntary. You can answer or decline to answer any or all of them. So at that point, the victim might say, I want to be done here. I want to be done talking to you. The officer could just mark the entire decline column. If the victim says, sure, I'll answer some more questions, then it might be a question by question. Yes, no, decline, no, decline, on an individual basis.
And is there any attempt on the officer to get the reason for the decline?
That, I think, I would have to look at individual cases. If a victim just says, I'm done talking to you, I don't know that officers are saying, why won't you answer these questions? Because one of our policies, I believe, is that officers will never criticize a victim for not participating in this questionnaire. If the victim says no thanks, the officer says, okay, thank you for speaking to me. So I would have to watch on a case-by-case basis almost to see if a victim gives any hints about why they decline.
Yeah, I think the form, maybe, in my opinion, it would be helpful to know if we're keeping track of the percentage of declines over this, to know why. And if we're not even asking the question, maybe they won't tell you why, but at least we're asking about it. And I do think that maybe every single question would be helpful to go, yeah, just hold on a minute. I have to ask you all these questions first before you go, so that they get an idea of what that risk assessment is, and so they understand a little bit about it. Maybe they'll change their mind after going through some of those questions. But maybe the form could be updated. I don't know. This is a form. I'm just one guy who doesn't know anything about this and learning. So thanks.
I appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Lindley.
Thanks. I want to come back to the discoverability for a second. Is that how did we make that decision? Are we completely sure that it's discoverable? There's no way to make it protected?
Correct. Because it is part of the law enforcement activity on scene, all of that is discoverable to the defense attorney.
And we've had exhaustive legal review on that?
Councilmember Lindley, if I may, that's a defendant's constitutional right to receive all the evidence. So absolutely, everything that happens during a criminal investigation is discoverable.
Okay.
Ms. Geary?
Yes, I just wanted to comment on CM Neese's inquiry about asking follow-up questions like, why won't you answer it? Just keep in mind, when an officer is responding, it's a heightened situation. She's just been assaulted. She's been hurt. She might be, needing medical treatment. So, her focus on documents probably isn't as focused as we'd like it to be.
All right, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mayor and Council. Any follow-up that you'd like on this risk assessment, risk and lethality assessment piece that we can bring back to you, or more clarification?
Ms. Shaw does.
I have one. I would like to learn more about what it would take to do the kind of case assessment that Detective Nash was talking about. I have no idea how resource intensive that is, but that would be a piece I'd be curious about.
Okay, so Councilmember Shaw, just so I'm clear, I mean, you're looking for just after the forms are filled out of kind of the follow-up side of...
No, I'm looking for, as what she was describing, of being able to review body cam footage to understand more about like why people are getting some more of these answers to the questions kind of that we're asking about, that sounds like there just isn't capacity for, but I don't have a good sense of what it would take to build that capacity. Is it hiring 20 people, one person? Just that high level conversation.
Okay, thank you. Absolutely.
I don't know that I can give you an exact number that you're probably looking for, Councilmember Shaw. Several years ago, I started a case assessment process where myself and a multidisciplinary team looked at cases from the point of dispatch through the point of the arrest decision. We were only able to review 10 cases, and that took many, many hours of overtime. And that was before my caseload increased exponentially. But it took myself, a Billings PD sergeant, a victim witness specialist, and a dispatch supervisor. Every meeting was on an overtime basis. I think we just met for an hour at a time, but during the course of the year, we only reviewed 10 cases. So very, very limited, but it was very intensive.
What kind of results would you expect to come out of a program like that?
Mayor, I think that we could potentially customize the scope of it. When I did the case assessment, I was using a best practices checklist from an organization called Praxis International that basically said, here's what you should be doing. Here's the ideal response, the ideal way that dispatchers are responding to callers, the ideal way officers are responding to people on scene. And so we just compared, did we do it? Did we not do it? Where could we improve? I have that report that I could share with council. I have a copy of that report that I'm happy to share with council at some point if you're interested. But I think it depends on what we're looking for. If we want to compare to best practices or if we just want to find answers to a specific list of questions, it really would be customizable, I think, but very intensive.
This might be for our computer guru here, but is there a role for AI in this analysis?
It could certainly help. Yeah. That's the short answer.
Exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Any more questions for Detective Nash? Thank you. Oh, there is one.
Well, this was back to Mr. Ifland. One of the things, the question that I had about the declination rate, I mean, I think that would be really important to understand, even if it was just, let's say, a 30-day period of time, some amount of time that maybe wouldn't be too burdensome to find out.
To kind of draw some stats out of that, of what that might extrapolate to?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else from council on this item?
Yeah, one from me. Maybe some, just an idea in later meetings as to if this form is in conflict with then what the officer is saying. Is there a hindrance to prosecution because, the evidence might look a little wonky? So I guess we'd like to know a little bit about that.
Okay. I'll be able to respond to you now on that question.
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, Mr. Nelson, you're asking if it makes it more difficult to prosecute. I'm loud in my own head. Can you guys hear me now? If I'm understanding your question correctly, you're wanting to know, does it make it more difficult to prosecute a case if the appraised answers given by a victim are in opposition to the details noted by the officer in a report?
Exactly.
Potentially, yes. Victim credibility is always a very important consideration in any case, not just a domestic violence case. But I would rather have an officer give us as much accurate information as possible within his or her written report instead of leaving information out to avoid having a conflict in information with the appraised answers.
And to follow up on that real quick, those inconsistent answers between a police officer's report and what's on an appraised form, that's just consistent with typical counterintuitive victim behavior. It's the world we have to live in, and I don't think there's any way to change that, to make victims answer things in a certain way that law enforcement detected. But we appreciate when law enforcement, if they're suspicious and they're worried, that they document that at the time.
All right, thank you.
All right, Mayor and Council, we'll move on to the next item up for discussion, victim advocacy and co-response. And I think we've got Aaron Lambert that's going to start us off on this piece of it.
I believe Jen is going to start and talk through the process from the city attorney's side and the systems-based response, and then I will follow that up with the community-based or non-criminal justice response.
Hi, and since we're both on the same agenda item, would it be possible for us both to do our spiel and then answer questions? Is that better? Okay. My name is Jen Weber. I am one of 3 victim witness specialists assigned to the domestic violence unit with the Billings City Attorney's Office. Our role is to provide assistance to victims, witnesses, and the general public, specifically to be the point of contact for domestic violence victims within the criminal justice system. It should be noted that we are not advocates. The main difference between advocates and my role is that advocates have privileged communications with victims like attorney-client, and therefore a release has to be signed for any of that communication to be released. They are not a part of the criminal justice system, and they provide services for victims. In contrast, my role is I do not have privileged communications. Everything that I discuss with the victim becomes discoverable to defense as part of the criminal case. And we do not provide services outside of our office, strictly through our office to provide communication. Our unit has 4 DV prosecutors who are supported by 2 VWs each, and we work all of our cases together. As Morgan covered in the last meeting, every morning we arrive at 7:30 or at 7 to check the court calendar to see what cases are set for arraignment at 8:30. We build cases in our case management system and create a bond prep email for the prosecutor. These prep notes include the case report, notes of injuries photos, substance use, mental health concerns, witnesses, anything along those lines, and notes on relevant intoxication. We also do further research into each defendant's history, including prior DV reports, charges, and convictions, recent law enforcement contact, concise criminal history lists, and any known failure to appear history. Every morning, one of the domestic violence investigators will listen to jail calls to check for violations of the no contact orders from the jail and any information that would be useful for our bond argument, and this information will be added to our notes to the attorneys. The purpose of us doing this is that we can know as much about the case and the defendant before we make contact with the victim. Our goal is to make contact prior to court at 8:30 or that same day. The last quarter, we had a 79% success rate of contact within 5 days, which is a lower percentage than normal. And some of the reasons we're not able to make contact include a victim doesn't have a working phone because the offender broke it, wrong contact information, victims ignoring or not returning our calls. And also, if a victim is an active defendant, we are ethically obligated to contact their defense attorney before we make contact with them to make sure that their rights and their own cases are protected. That takes time. Once we make contact, we let them know the offender has been arrested. They will appear in court that morning and explain what the charges are. We will explain what the arraignment process looks like, including the judge deciding if a bond will be ordered or not, the continuation of the no contact order that was issued by officers, and what conditions the defendant will have to follow while the case is pending. We let them know they have the right to watch the hearing via Zoom because that's the way the offenders are going to appear for court anyway, so they don't need to come down to the courthouse if they don't want to. They have the right to make a statement to the judge at that initial hearing, but only in regards to bond and release conditions, including the no contact order, but nothing specific to the facts of the case. After court's over, we try to make contact again to go over everything that the judge ordered. If GPS is ordered, we'll get all of the zones or the addresses that the victim wants the offender to stay away from and provide those to the GPS monitoring company. and will ask the victim if they want to be notified by the jail if offender is released. Sometimes they don't. If they do, we will email the jail their contact information and ask them to call. We let them know that the case is not them versus the defendant. It is us as the city of Billings versus the defendant, and therefore they do not have a right to drop the case. They can also throw us under the bus if anybody gives them a hard time that they pressed charges or they did this to the offender. We'll take that hit because it is the honest truth. However, we do want their input, as their voice is incredibly important to how we handle their cases, as it is their lives that all of this is affecting. That does not translate to us just doing what they want. If a victim, but it does allow for us to have a meaningful and honest conversation with them as to how and why we can't do or won't do something. We want to create an open dialogue so that they feel heard. We will talk to them about crime victims' compensation, thinking about getting into counseling, applying for a temporary order of protection, safety planning, how to report if a defendant violates the no contact order, and try to answer all the questions they have. This is not a one-time conversation, and it is ongoing throughout the duration of the case and beyond. We'll mail out victim packets on every new case. That includes court dates, conditions of release, explanation of the court process, an affidavit of financial loss if they want to ask for restitution, and a victim impact statement. Victims have the right to make a statement to the court, either through the impact statement or in person at sentencing. They also have the right to be present at all court hearings, but they are not required to. We consult with them regarding plea offers and let them know when we send those offers out to defense and updates as the case progresses. If a victim does decide to come to a criminal hearing or files for an order of protection, we can go with them to those hearings. We are there for support and to explain what is happening. For order of protection hearings, we are not attorneys and are not allowed to go with them to the tables when they're presenting their case, but we do help them prepare for this process and be there while they explain why they are asking for this order of protection. A victim can receive this assistance whether or not they're an active victim in our office or not. If during our conversation with the victim, it becomes apparent that they need additional resources and services, we will either refer them to call the Northern Lights Family Justice Center or use the internal referral process to ask Northern Lights to reach out to them directly. Part of our partnership allows us to work part-time at Northern Lights, which gives us a unique opportunity to collaborate with other FJC partners and staff cases very quickly in the hallways versus waiting for emails to come through back and forth. We're also able to make contact with victims who are not ready to report to law enforcement. We can explain what might reporting look like, fill out TROs in an attempt to help them feel safe enough to report, or at the least get some distance from their abuser. In addition to the FJC, we also direct people to Angeles Piazza for their services and their support groups, because we all want to help victims feel supported so when they are ready to report, they know that they are not alone. We work to build a good rapport with the victim to keep them engaged in the process, but also know they can reach out to us at any point now or in the future if they need to. A high percentage of victims will return to their offender multiple times before they are ready to leave for good. And we want to make sure that they know that we are ready for them if and when they find themselves in the situation again. At its core, the criminal justice system is designed to protect the constitutional rights of defendants. Victims have limited and very different rights under the state constitution, as they are not listed parties in a criminal proceeding. Because of this, a victim cannot be forced to do anything, nor should they be. Victims have autonomy, and we want to be there for them when they are ready to engage in the system.
All right, I will be sharing with you about both YWCA and the Northern Lights Family Justice Center and how we are working together and what is available there. So we have a variety of services that are available to survivors. The first one that is probably our most requested service, and also unfortunately the hardest to get into, is our emergency shelter. It's known as Gateway Horizons, and a lot of people think that YWCA is just a shelter. We haven't been just a shelter in about 15 years. We've got a lot of other services, but the shelter is a piece that's highly requested. We have 25 studio units, so when a person comes into shelter, They are assigned a unit with either just themselves or themselves and their family. We don't make strangers share spaces. That's really unfair to people who've experienced trauma and people who've had to leave their home at no fault of their own. We want to make sure that their experience in shelter is good. We could pack in more, but we are choosing to prioritize quality over quantity in this particular instance. When somebody calls the helpline for shelter, we do another danger assessment. So as you saw the appraise assessment, we also use the Jackie Campbell danger assessment, which you all should have in front of you. It's based on very similar research, and you'll see that the questions are fairly similar. The Jackie Campbell assessment gets in a little bit deeper on a few questions that are not included in the appraise assessment around particularly unemployment status, drug or alcohol use, whether or not there's a child in the home that does not belong to the abuser, and things like that. So if they've declined to do that risk assessment with an officer, they're going to get it when they call the helpline. And my team has been trained that they go through those questions and get a score, and then they go through and say, this is what this score means for you. We used to do the appraise assessment on the helpline, and I was confused, or I don't know if confused, but I was surprised that almost all of them were scoring in the high risk category. And so we thought that going to the Jackie Campbell assessment may help us get a little bit more nuance and that we would get lower scores. I was wrong. We are still getting very, very high scores. And so hopefully, you know, through the education, the victim understands kind of what that means for them. Because that is administered by an advocate and not by law enforcement, it is not discoverable, nor do we share it with the criminal justice system. That is something that is for our files. We use it for safety planning, but it is not something that will ever get back to the offender. So we may get more honesty on those questions, I guess. If we have room in shelter and the person is eligible for shelter, which right now what that means is they need to be from this area, they need to ideally, or not ideally, but likely they've been living with the person. So they don't have a safe place to stay separate from the person who is harming them. And it has to be intimate partner violence. We are not able to shelter people if it's like a brother or sister dispute or mom or dad, that kind of thing. The reason why is, again, we are packed to the gills. We turn folks away. This isn't necessarily 700 different people, but 700 times a year, we have to tell somebody on the phone that we don't have enough space for them. We doubled the size of our shelter 3 years ago and thought that would fix or at least help address the problem. And I was also wrong on that. It took 4 days to fill that doubled capacity. Once they come into shelter, they have up to 90 days to stay. One thing I wanted to talk about a little bit on this to answer some questions is the appraise process. When we implemented the appraise assessment, we agreed that it would not be a good look, or it may be really discouraging to officers if every time they called the shelter, we said, sorry, we're full. So we do keep one room in the shelter open that we call the appraise room, and it's specifically for law enforcement referred clients. So anytime an officer calls, unless we get 2 in one night, which is relatively rare, if an officer is calling the shelter on behalf of a survivor or with a survivor, they will have room. It's a shorter term stay. That's only guaranteed 3 to 5 days. Hopefully, in that time, somebody else will leave shelter and they can stay longer. But if not, we spend those 3 to 5 days connecting them with other resources and trying to figure out where a safe place for them might be. It could be getting a civil order of protection in place so that the abuser can't return to the home and having that second layer of protection. It might be identifying friends or family where they could go. Sometimes it's getting them the heck out of Billings, and we have several ways that we do that. One would be a bus ticket. Sometimes we can purchase those depending on the circumstances. We also partner with what's called Angel Flight, and that is a group of private pilots who volunteer to transport victims of domestic violence and human trafficking if they need to relocate for their safety. So we can, if there's a pilot available and if it's a place that Angel Flight flies to, we use that process for relocation. Let's see. I think that kind of covers the appraise and shelter process. When somebody's in shelter, they have the option to access the other services we have at YWCA. It is not required. Per the conditions of our grant funding, we are not able to require victims to do anything in order to receive shelter. We can't tell them they have to go to counseling. We can't tell them they have to meet with a case manager. We just can't. And so they have autonomy. But we don't say, do you want to meet? What our case managers do, it's the same services navigators that provide the case management for Northern Lights. They just send a meeting appointment letter over to shelter and say, you know, we've got this meeting scheduled with you. Some come, some don't. If they don't come to the scheduled appointment, let's see, I guess before they send the appointment letter, they do try to talk with them and schedule an appointment, but if they can't reach them, they send the letter. If they don't come to that appointment, they'll make a second attempt to schedule something. If they don't come after 2, then it's up to them to get in touch and schedule an appointment if they want to. We figure after 2 attempts, 2 appointments that they missed, that they're probably not interested in our services, and that's okay. They can be interested at any point. Sometimes people stay 45 days and then they're like, oh, maybe I should do something because my time's ticking, and that's fine. When they meet with the services navigator, and this is the same for both shelter residents and FJCS, they do this if they have not done a safety plan, or excuse me, not the safety plan, the danger assessment with the helpline advocate, they will do that with the services navigator. They also fill out what we call the services menu, which you also have in front of you. And that is a document that we created collaboratively. It was the Victim Service Delivery Committee of the Northern Lights developed that form. We put on there what services we know are available, and then we tried to also put any need we could think of that a survivor might need access to. They fill that out with the service navigator, and they choose what they would like. Many of them only choose civil legal help and housing. That's our primary 2 requests. Some fill out more. Depending on what they fill out, some of those referrals are in-house, some are external. So replacement of documents is on there. We will pay for replacement of documents. So that happens with the services navigator. We can also help them in our computer lab fill out applications online for things like SNAP benefits, TANF. We can refer them to Riverstone for WIC if they need that. We can help them with Best Beginnings, Housing Authority of Billings applications. Those types of things happen in-house. If it needs to be an outside referral, we make sure that they have the contact information. And if they would like assistance in making that call and scheduling an appointment, we are happy to do that in the office with them. We let them choose how they'd like to proceed with that. Support groups, we send Angeles Piazza is the provider for support groups, so we make sure that they know about that and discuss transportation if that's a barrier for them. We try to figure out what we can do about that, and we have offered if there are people who do not have transportation but wish to take part in it, we could pay for a lift for them to attend support group. We don't get a lot of people taking us up on that, but it is an option. Then as you go down, the criminal justice system referrals, if somebody marks any category in there, that referral, not the services menu because we don't want that to become discoverable, but a separate referral form is filled out with the victim and defendant's name and what their question is or what they want to talk about. And that's given to the victim witness specialist. And the victim witness specialist follows up on that and determines, is this something that needs to be referred to Officer Funk and Officer Nash, or is this something that the victim advocate can take care of, or does it need to go to the prosecutor? So they triage and follow up on those. They also are the ones who are helping with orders of protection if it's uncomplicated, which means if there's no children in the home, or if there aren't significant assets or other factors that make lower court inappropriate for an order of protection petition. You can get an order of protection in the lower courts if there's children involved, but they don't really like to do that because parenting matters are a district court purview. And so if they want or need an order of protection and it's outside of the scope of what the VWs can handle, then they're referred to Fawn, our attorney who's on site at YWCA in the Justice Center. She cannot represent everybody. So when they meet with Fawn, they're not getting an attorney, unfortunately, because there's only one of her. But what they get is a licensed attorney who can give them legal advice, help them identify the solutions that would be appropriate for them. She will go to the hearings with them as a support person. She will prepare the packets of forms that they need to fill out, and she oftentimes will present the packet to the survivor and say, fill out what you can, and then we'll meet again and I can go over it and we can fill in anything that you missed or any questions that you have, but it's more expeditious for her to have them do what they can of that paperwork. Also, it's empowering. We're helping the survivors to have the tools to help themselves. The other legal services Fawn can help with, so she does a lot of parenting plans and dissolutions are her two biggest ones. She also can help with some landlord-tenant disputes or enforcement of VAWA rights or Violence Against Women Act rights in public housing. She also has helped with identifying immigration attorneys and making referrals if that is an appropriate referral. It doesn't happen a lot, but we do occasionally have survivors who are in this country and their abuser is the one who is a citizen and they are interfering with the other person's ability to have legal status. And so we can help them identify the path to remaining here legally. And there are specific visa paths for victims of crime, and there are attorneys that help with that. So Fawn can make those connections. The last service that we have, I think, that's in-house full-time is our housing navigation. Housing Navigator is primarily helping people identify what their housing barriers might be and how they might address those. So she asks about, do they have felony convictions or are they on offender registries that would make housing more hard? She asks about credit, if they owe any landlords or utility companies past due balances that would make it hard. And then if they have those barriers, she tries to figure out what the solution would be. If it's past due utilities, she refers them to HRDC and the LEAP program to get assistance with that. If it's poor landlord references, she helps them draft a letter that can be turned in with their application that explains that they're a survivor of violence and the reason for their poor rental history is the experiences they've had in the relationship. She also can provide lists of landlords, private landlords in the community. She can coach them on how to search for a rental. She's willing to go with them to do walkthroughs at rentals before they sign a lease if they want somebody to help them with that. She does that. Additionally, in that program, we have about 32 slots of rapid rehousing and transitional housing assistance. What that is, it's very much like a Section 8 voucher, just shorter term. So we can pay for a survivor's rent for 1 to 2 years, depending on the circumstances, their needs, and which program they're in. And that includes security deposit. So when we have funds available, which there's a lot of people that could use it and only 32 or so at a time get it, but if they are approved for that program, we pay the deposit and the rent directly to the landlord, but the lease is in the survivor's name. So they can stop participating in our program at any time, but remain in their home. Also, ideally, what happens is when our rent assistance ends and we pull back, that they are able to stay in that home and either have a Section 8 voucher that they've come up on the list, pay for it, or they've spent the 1 to 2 years getting employment, getting their financial affairs in order, getting debts and things that are in collections paid off so that they can then afford the rent going forward. And we have been able to offer that prior to the Family Justice Center. That was only available. Actually, all of our services were only available to people who lived in shelter, but with the Family Justice Center and adding a second case manager, we've been able to expand that to anybody in the community who is eligible for those services. Since July 1st of 2024, we've served 386 individuals, adults, through the Northern Lights Family Justice Center, and 81% of those did not receive any shelter services. So only 75 of the 386 utilized shelter as well. So it definitely is an expanded capacity in the community. There's a lot of people that are getting help that wouldn't have before. A couple other pieces I wanted to go through, questions to answer, and then I'll take questions. Somebody asked about the helpline referral process. So if somebody calls the helpline at any time, if they are not approved for shelter, but if they have domestic violence, including if it's a family member or other non-intimate partner, then they are offered a referral to the Family Justice Center. And what that means is Their name and phone number and email address is taken and put into our database, and then the contact information is given to the services navigators, and then they can get in the helpline or in the database, and they can see the notes from the call and kind of what the concern is. And then they call the survivor and offer the services that we have available. They also try twice, so they will attempt a call. They'll leave a voicemail if it's safe to do so. They'll text message. They'll send an email. If the survivor is not identified that those are safe, they won't leave any other trace. They'll just try to call. But they'll do that twice. And if after 2 times they don't get a response, then they just move on. They assume that the person isn't ready, and they'll go from there. But if the person pops back up again, they can engage at any time. Somebody asked how many people take advantage of the referrals. That's hard to tell because, again, we have so many. Like, the referral is made, and then there's a lot where it's the 2 attempts to contact were made and they didn't follow up. And I will say that those attempts to contact happen fairly quickly. Debbie and Sierra, the 2 case managers, are reviewing those in the day. So it should be within the same business day or the next business day. That does mean that they don't get FJC services on the weekend, but in order to staff that, it would be at a significant cost to add 24/7 staffing, in addition to the advocate we have on duty. So I don't know how many people actually take advantage of it, but we offer it. I will say with the appraise referral, it's very, very rare that an officer calls on behalf of a survivor for shelter when they decline to come to shelter. Every once in a while, but almost always, if the officer is involved in making that referral, the person does choose to come to shelter. And then what happens on weekends? Councilmember Kennedy, you'd asked that. They will have access to the helpline, which is a trained 24/7 support person, so they can call and ask questions, they can safety plan, they can get referrals to other resources. If we're not able to offer shelter, we always make sure that they have the number to Off the Streets, Montana Rescue Mission, Family Promise. We also talk about, again, is there friends or family that might be safe, those kinds of things. The state of Montana used to have a program where the state would pay a hotel 5 nights for shelter for DV and human trafficking survivors. It was a fantastic 6 months, and we used that a lot as our backup. The fund ran out of money real quick. But my understanding is that they are revamping it, and it's refunded, and starting in July, we'll be able to access that program again, which is really exciting. And if somebody is in the hotel that we have referred, we make sure that they have microwavable and hotel-friendly foods for the weekend and check in with them. And also, they end up on the priority list for shelter. So if a room in shelter becomes available during their 5 days, they're offered first dibs at that shelter room. I think that's all I have to share, but I'm sure you have questions that I would love to answer.
Thank you. Any questions for either one of our presenters? Mr. Lindley?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks for sharing all this information. It's super helpful. To the helpline, I did have a couple more questions. So do you have data and statistics that would tell us things like number of calls that happen in a month? I'm also curious if there's one person manning the phone line, which it sounds like there is. And these phone calls, I can't imagine, are short. So it's probably possible that somebody could call while the person's on the phone with someone else. Are they allowed to leave a message?
They are.
So can you talk a little bit more about some of that?
I can. Thank you, Councilmember Lindley. So if nobody answers the phone, whether they're with another person or on another line, there is the ability to leave a voicemail, but we make it very clear that if it is safe to call you back and you'd like us to call you back, please leave a voicemail. If it is not safe for you to leave a voicemail, please continue to try to reach us so that hopefully they'll call a few times. And that does happen, unfortunately, with only one person on duty. In my dream world, I would have 2. I would have somebody to manage the response to the hospital for sexual assault survivors and strangulation survivors and manage folks in shelter and their needs, and somebody to answer the helpline. That would require $300,000 to $400,000 more every year in order to do that. So it's a heavy lift. It's something that we haven't been able to solve great, other than please keep trying, or leave a message and we'll get back to you when we can. They do try to keep the helpline calls as short as possible. I mean, like with most of them, I would say are 15 to 30 minutes. If it gets much beyond that, then it starts getting into potentially a mental health counseling, and we'll refer them to mental health helplines. Or we can refer them to the National DV helpline, where that is all they do. And so they may be able to spend more time chatting with them.
So just to follow up though, and if you don't have it now, it might just be something I'd be curious about on a follow-up, like a 30-day number of calls.
Yes.
And then also curious, out of all the calls that came in, how many were missed? So 1,000 calls were made, were 400 of them answered, 600?
That is a very good question. I can give you the numbers of calls. I can look it up right now if you'd like. Maybe. All right. Nope, I lost my internet connection, so I can't. But I can tell you that we're at about 2,500 helpline calls a year. As far as how many are missed, I would say we don't track that, so I can't give you an exact.
I'm sure your phone system would have it, honestly.
Probably.
Yeah.
I would say it's in a month, maybe 40. I mean, it's one or two maybe a day where the phone call is missed. Provided also we have a VoIP or voice over internet phone system, and there are times where there's glitches and things don't come through the way that they should, unfortunately. So there may be some that we don't know about, but I would say that the significant majority of calls are answered.
Sorry, final thing. Is that something that you could also actually get the number?
Yes,
really
absolutely.
Okay.
I can give it to you by the number of day, or
perfect.
by the day.
Awesome.
Thank you, Mayor. Erin, you mentioned that this assessment's done by you guys, and if a lot of these are coming out as high risk,
Mhm.
and I'm assuming they've already filled these out by the police as well, or are some of your clients there not filling them out for the police, and the first time it's filled it out with you guys?
I would say the number is changing. It used to be almost exclusively people that were utilizing our services had not had contact with law enforcement. Since we've implemented the Family Justice Center, I would say we're up to maybe 20 to 30% of the people that we're serving have utilized law enforcement and ideally have done an appraise assessment when the officer responded. The other 70%, the first time they're doing it may be with our advocate.
Okay. To Amy's point about, it's a difficult time for them to maybe fill that out, and they maybe fill out for the first time with you. When you discover that that's a high-risk offender, do you notify the police of that? Is there anything that you give the police to know that this is a high-risk situation?
Councilmember Neese, that's a great question. We talk through, and we take our time with it. We aren't, thankfully, under the crunch that officers are on scene, that they got to get to the next call. So we take our time and hopefully do it in a trauma-informed manner. If it comes out high risk, we let them know what that means, and we let them know that there are officers in our building that they could work with, that we know that are good, they're not scary, they're there to help. Encourage them to report to law enforcement. If they choose not to, we ask if we could share their abuser's name with the DV team to see if that person has other warrants out that they may be able to be arrested on. If they decline to give us permission, we are not able to share. And without asking them if it's okay, unfortunately or fortunately, because of the Montana advocate privilege statute, we're not able to share that information.
Okay. So if they are willing to, then you can share your assessment with the police, and that goes a part of that discoverable record, or do they go back and fill out the city form and that becomes part of their record?
Councilmember Neese, I believe that they would do another appraise assessment with the officer who took their initial report. I could defer to Katie, but we at no time do we ever share that danger assessment outside of our files because of the risk of it becoming discoverable.
Okay, thank you. And then another question I had was, you mentioned the order of protection is hard to get when you have children involved. That sounds a little counterintuitive for protecting the family. Can you speak to that, and what can be done to have those order protections, or maybe the attorneys could do to what we as a city can do to help get those things resolved, at least temporarily, until that danger is subsided in some way or another?
Councilmember Neese, that's a good question. It isn't so much that it's hard to get them if with kids, it just means that it is better if an attorney has been involved, and it really, if there are children involved, ideally it's filed in district court right away instead of one of the lower courts, because there's a constitutional right to parent in Montana. They want to be issuing parenting plans rather than order of protection. Not saying that judges won't do it. They will issue an order of protection. It just really is best to be done through the district court, because if it isn't, and then they file a parenting plan, the order of protection has to be removed from whatever lower court it is into the higher court anyway. So it's part of us using that strategy is to just make fewer steps for them. If they want to file in a lower court, and we will support them, and I believe there are instances, I'll defer to Jen or the prosecutors, but I believe city court will sometimes issue orders of protection with the children on them. It's just a strategic decision more than anything.
Okay, just real quick on this, maybe Councilmember Asperlander can ask this question because I know he's familiar with this law, but would the Brady law assist with these situations of getting order protections when children are involved? No. Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Kennedy, then Ms. Shaw, then Mr. O'Donnell.
When we first started the Family Justice Center, we had a room full of a lot of providers at the YWCA. When we talked to a lot of folks, they've never had a referral, they've never been contacted, and I understand your frustration, you don't have enough rooms and things like that, but it seems like you want to do it all in one place, and we're not reaching out and getting services. I don't think we've been contacted except to be contacted from your staff for to be able to offer some respite care. We have child care, we have child therapy, we have home visits and working with the parents and the children. I'm very concerned about, and I don't know if it's a funding issue or what it is, those children are devastated. And they have been either taken out of their home, they've witnessed a lot of aggression. There's a lot of problems there. And I guess I would just like to ask you how in the future that you, as the contracting agency for the Family Justice Center, are really going to work with the different agencies in town. Are you going to bring them together? Are you going to tell them how your referral system works, how we can help people? Because it sounds like we're putting a Family Justice Center and we're not reaching out to all the services in the community. So I'd just like to hear your response.
Thank you, Councilmember Kennedy. I know that referrals are being made to those organizations because we track them in the database. We mark the organizations or agencies that individuals are referred to. If they don't choose to make that call in the room with the services navigator, we're bound by the same confidentiality and can't call for them. So that is a challenge. I will say that I'm happy we do have partners who come on site and do services. We have TRIO, the education support. They come a couple of times a month and use our computer lab. We also are partnering with Montana Legal Services. They've had some challenges hiring an attorney, but they will be adding an attorney who will be on site once a week at YWCA. We also have partnered with the Billings Education Foundation on a few initiatives around access to literacy and things like that. We don't have a ton of families that take up on children-related things. We encourage, but as I said earlier, we can't require. We also have the Riverstone Health Wellness on Wheels mobile that comes once a month to our campus, and so they're there at the FJC for people to come to. We also, for all on-site and off-site partners in the FJC and people who have an interest or a professional work in this domestic violence space, we have a once a month advisory committee meeting where we meet for an hour and a half to talk about referral processes and, you know, address any concerns. And we do have a referral form that has been shared with agencies. I don't know that every agency has had it, but I know that we have a referral form because we get it from, we get lots from Self-Help Law. HRDC does referrals to us. I believe Angela's has done referrals to us as well. So I thank you for the feedback, and I will certainly address it. But there is lots of community collaboration happening.
Just to follow up to that, I think the whole piece of this is the child piece, because we've had kids come into our center that have been through some of the other areas.
Mm-hmm.
Mom didn't know what services were offering services, but I have some real concern for the children. And the longer we get, 6 months, 8 months, a year, that they're out and about in the community and not getting those services because they may not be an agency that you're dealing with right now or whatever, those kids are at risk, and big at risk. I'm glad you're working with the Education Foundation at the school district. They're not the service provider. So I would just ask in the future, you do work with the service providers.
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. This has been great. This is both for you and for Mr. Ifland on terms of things to follow up on. I just want to piggyback on what the questions Councilmember Lindley had about call volume, and as much data as you feasibly can pull out of that. I'd be curious about, you know, are there certain times of day? What's the difference between weekends and weekdays? Just so we can get a sense of if it is a needed ask at some point. Mm-hmm. I don't know what triggers that, but I would really like to know if there's certain like hotspot times that we should be thinking about trying to staff an additional person or something like that. So whatever information you can get us from that would be very helpful.
You can, Councilmember Shaw, I can't necessarily pinpoint by like time of day. I can pinpoint by date. So we could identify weekends versus weekdays. I can tell you from 21 years of doing this and, you know, following up on notes from helpline calls and things like that, that our busiest times are Fridays and Mondays. And usually it's between about 9 in the morning to 8 or 9 at night. I will say that the overnight and weekend shifts are generally pretty quiet.
That's very helpful. But yeah, I'd love to see the numbers too. As long as that's not super intensive to pull out, I just think it's helpful information. So I appreciate that.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Thank you. I've been trying to figure out how to phrase the question. Are there people who simply refuse to cooperate with the service, who find any procedure to be burdensome? They are incoherent, or they just don't trust anybody, so they will not accept any help at all?
Councilmember O'Donnell, yes. I mean, there are people who are not interested in engaging in services for lots of reasons. Sometimes it's a trust issue. Sometimes there's people who really need very little supports in order to get stable. Like if they already have a job and they they have their stuff together, but they just need to get out of that relationship, they may engage in fewer services than somebody who has more intensive needs. It also depends on where they're at in, potentially a substance use journey and whether or not they're willing to address substance use or addiction, whether or not they're ready to leave the relationship. Because the reality is that a lot of folks, even when they're reaching out to us for assistance, are still very much in love with the person who is harming them and wants the abuse to stop, but they don't want to end the relationship. And those folks sometimes are less inclined to engage in resources. And finally, there are people who want us to do it for them. Like they want to just, they want to have an attorney that is representing them that will file the divorce for them, or they want us to go to the courthouse to get their birth certificate, or us to find a therapist and make them appointment and tell them when it is. And unfortunately, that just isn't feasible for us. We can help them get where they need to go, but we can't do it for them. Does that answer your question?
Well, partially. I'm thinking about people who are just intimidated by a system, simply refuse to accept any help. What portion of the affected community of people who actually call you don't follow through for whatever abundance of reasons, don't follow through and accept any help at all? You might say that they fall through the cracks. And I have one question beyond that.
We don't track that specifically. I'm just trying to think anecdotally because I do review all the call notes and those things. I would say probably half reach out for assistance and either don't come to shelter even when they're approved, or they come to shelter and they don't stay, or they come to shelter and they stay, but they choose not to engage in any of the services.
Half?
Probably.
My goodness. Thank you.
Regarding the referrals, so a police officer writes out a referral with phone number on it, and they give it to the victim, and then the victim calls you. Do you receive a copy of the referrals that the police hand out so you could compare them to who calls and who doesn't?
Mayor Nelson, we do not receive a copy of those referrals. And again, as Officer Nash referenced a few times, the labor intensity of reconciling that would be beyond what we're able to provide at this time.
Would it help if you were able to follow up, get a copy of the referral and see that, oh, this person didn't call me, so perhaps I could reach out? I don't even know if that's a possibility, but is it?
Mayor Nelson, yes, that is a possibility. We've talked about it. I don't believe with our current staffing capacity that we want to take on doing the follow-up calls. That is what the victim witness specialists do. If there is a criminal charge, the victim witness specialists do that follow-up. I wouldn't be opposed to doing something like that in the future, but it would take several more staff members in order to do that effectively.
I'm not sure who this is for, but how many of those referrals a day do we give out? Does anybody know?
Referrals from the law enforcement side?
Well, no, but there is, once an appraise is done, as I understand it, then the officer can decide, well, I'm going to refer you to the Family Justice Center or to the YWCA. And then they hand out the cards or the phone numbers. And then it's up to the victim to decide if they call. So is there a comparison or an ability to reach out for the YWCA to reach out? I guess what I'm trying to look at is there a way that we can make the system more effective and efficient, A, and then B, can we see by looking at the utilization rates how effective our procedures are right now?
I don't know. I would have to think about that. Our officers would not be able to give a copy of the appraise form because it's
understood.
It's criminal justice information. If an officer our officers know to refer to the helpline, and if they don't get an answer, to either leave a message or send a text message to the helpline. So there would potentially be a way to track, and if there was staff capacity, to follow up on those referrals that maybe went unanswered. Beyond that, I'm not sure what the process would look like.
Okay.
And those would only be related to the law enforcement attached victims, not the other 70% that never called the police department.
Well, exactly, but like, for lack of a better term, the leakage. How many phone numbers are we getting out, and how many calls are being made, and would help us to look a little bit more at the effectiveness of the person on the street program. I don't even know if that's making sense, but that's what I'm trying to get at. Okay, thanks. Dr. Nicholson, then Mr. Pittman, then Mr. Nat.
Thank you.
Mr. Neese.
This may be a more complicated question than it sounds, but what interventions, what activities are associated with good outcomes? Realizing that a good outcome is maybe a difficult thing to decide.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholson. That's hard to say for sure for a couple of reasons. One is that we operate under our voluntary services model. We also operate under the philosophy that we don't decide what a good outcome is, the survivor does. And so in order for us to look, we would have to hear from them, do you believe you had a good outcome or you did not? And many of them, when they're in a place where they're having a good outcome, we don't ever hear from them again until, sometimes it's 10 years later and they're like, oh, I stayed there and it was so amazing and super helpful. As far as though, like I said, it's hard to say what a good outcome is. I think a good outcome is if they've connected to services, because hopefully, and we see this a lot, even if they don't engage the first time or they don't follow through the first time, sometimes the second, third, fifth, 10th time we see them, they do. And so we create an atmosphere where it's safe for them to keep trying until they do get to that good outcome.
I have two questions. Are the city and the county procedures the same? Are they following the same format? And that would be the first question.
Okay, Councilmember Pittman. I can't speak to the county's actual procedures. They are not the same as the city's procedures. My understanding is it is also their staffing capacity. So they do try to contact victims in charged cases. I don't know what their actual policy is as far as contacting a victim within a certain number of days and how often they stay in contact, but it is different than the city attorney's office DV unit.
Okay. So I guess as we go forward, one of the conversations we need to have is making sure that the city and the county are at the table at the same time, because our community is very spotty in city county things happening, and one person may be living in the city and one may be in the county, or they may move to the county. There's a lot of things going on there that somehow we have to bring everybody together at the same time. And then following up on resources, are we giving our officers a brochure that doesn't fit just a man offending a woman, but all the different, whether it's elder abuse or whatever's going on, resources? So here's the Family Justice Center, but here's also elder abuse or domestic abuse on other levels. Do we have a brochure put together that instead of just one referral to one place, because it's not going to be a one size fits all in domestic violence?
No, Councilmember Pittman, that's an excellent point. We have our victim notice of rights forms, which all partner family member assault victims receive, that talks about how to get an order of protection. It gives community resources. That form has those resources on it. Identifying those helpful partner agencies happens during trainings as well. So we go to like roll call trainings for the patrol division and explain to them, this is what the Family Justice Center does. This is how to access elder abuse services. Those individual agencies also come to the roll call trainings occasionally. So officers know that they are out there. The Billings Area Family Violence Task Force also puts together a community resource guide with that information. So officers can tailor referrals to individual cases.
Councilman Pittman, if I can follow up on your previous question between the city and the county. One big difference is that the county victim witness coordinators are not specialized. They don't have a specific domestic violence sexual assault unit like the city does. And so all of their 8 victim witness coordinators handle every type of crime. And so because of that, they do have to operate differently.
Mr. Neese?
Thank you. I just want to indicate that I agree with trying to get some additional data. And Kevin, I don't know if the 911 center can produce a timeline report that shows when domestic violent calls come in, so we can kind of see on a weekly timeline or what that frequency is over a month or 3 months, so we have a good idea of what actually is what's happening in the city. Hopefully the system can easily generate a report without having 3 people working 3 days on it. I did have also follow up to Councilmember Kennedy. Aaron, you mentioned that you have a monthly meeting, that you also mentioned that you let's see here, that you track the referral systems as far as how you refer things out. Can you get us a report as far as I'm not asking for individual victims' information. I'm just, how many referrals to what agencies that you're referring out every single month, so we understand what other agencies you're working with, as well as, on this monthly meeting you have, who's a member, a part of this, because the first meeting we had lots of people out there who mentioned, it came forward, said how they work with domestic violence victims, and I just want to make sure all of those are included in that. And if they're not, maybe reaching out to those to make sure they're a member or a part of this monthly meeting, so they can participate and bring some of their ideas into this. And then one last question I had, and as far as domestic violence comes in a lot of different forms, and so and Katie, this may be for you, but how does the Family Justice Center work, or the YWCA work with when it comes to human trafficking victims? How involved are they in that process as well? In that, so if you could kind of explain that.
So I can say from the law enforcement side, human trafficking we are not picking up on it nearly as frequently as our domestic violence cases. The officers have been trained through our roll call trainings that the Family Justice Center and associated resources are available to human trafficking victims, but it's just not as common a crime for us to be aware of. That doesn't mean that outside of law enforcement engagement that it's not a referral source. I'll let Aaron talk to that part.
Yes, we do serve human trafficking survivors, but I would echo what Katie said, that it just isn't, we don't get requests from trafficking survivors near the rate that we get domestic violence survivors reaching out. Some of that may be definition. We are not necessarily screening for people who are engaging in what you might call survival sex, which is technically human trafficking if you're exchanging sex for a roof over your head or drugs or whatever. So we aren't necessarily screening for that. And I don't know that those folks are necessarily calling us for assistance, but we do work closely with the Department of Justice and the FBI, and there are services available, and they're able to stay in shelter and access services if they come to us.
Okay, and then just a quick question. You mentioned something about your people, or I'm not sure who it was. They make 2 attempts of calls. I'm not sure what it was you were referring to, as far as, is it the services you provide, or is it just 2 attempts to the referral that you got, and then you don't follow up anymore?
Councilmember Neese, so we make 2 attempts to reach out and contact that person to schedule and do an intake with them. If they do not return calls or come to the center or schedule an interview after 2 attempts, we don't follow up on that until we get another referral.
Okay, so that's a little concerning for me because I think what you said was you make two attempts the same day.
No, I'm sorry if I did. They usually do those attempts. They'll make an attempt, and usually 2 to 4 days, depending on kind of where it falls in the week, they make a second attempt. It's never on the same day.
Okay, I still think 2 attempts is too few. Back in the day, I used to be in collections, and it took a lot more than 2 attempts to get a hold of someone. And so it may be something that you guys look at. I know it's more time consuming, but you're going to reach more people if you vary and have more calls and vary times and stuff like that. But yeah, I that's concerning that you're only doing two and then letting it go. Thank you.
Councilmember Neese, can I explain that part of that it's not just staffing. Part of that is victim autonomy and choice. And it's possible that between when a referral was made and when we reach out to them in that day or so, they may have reconciled with the partner, or they may have changed their mind. And so we are trying to also be cognizant of the safety of the person and not potentially putting them in danger to keep calling, or if they just are not ready for services, like that's a choice that they can make, and we're trying to respect that. We can certainly talk about doing some more follow-up attempts, but it wouldn't be, we wouldn't treat it the way we would a collection agency, just because victims don't have to have services if they don't want them.
I understand, and I'm not comparing that to a collection. I'm just saying that just the fact of people's schedules, people's times. You mentioned the phones are broken. It could take 2 or 3 days or a week before they get their phone fixed. There's a lot of things that are happening in that situation, and it just seems to me two contacts is just too few.
And may also follow up that we also use email frequently. So sometimes they'll do 2 phone calls and then an email attempt as well. Or if the phone number doesn't work, or if the voicemail is set up, they'll attempt an email.
So you'll do 3 contacts. Okay.
Two
again,
is policy, but they
I'm just
do
hearing
try
you tell
every
me 2 phone calls and contacts, and now you're saying 3. So there's other things, maybe text messaging you also do.
Yes.
I don't know, but it appears to me that that there may be need for more contacts, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
All right, I think Mr. O'Donnell will round us out.
Thank you. So this is round 2. On round 1, we had a few women who talked about said that the police in certain situations were very helpful. Others said that police were not helpful at all. That was a stark contrast between them. I'm trying to figure out from all this, what is the role of the city in this? We can't protect people from everything that happens inside of a home. What are people looking for the city to do? How can we be responsive in some material way to the situation other than by giving more money?
Councilmember O'Donnell, I guess that would be, in my view, the city of Billings is doing a great job with the DV unit and that system, and then partnering and helping support the Family Justice Center as a solution. I don't believe it's the city's job necessarily to provide those community-based services, since there are organizations that are doing that, but supporting those efforts is really important, because we don't ever charge a survivor for any services they receive. I will say that you probably in the community will hear sort of, maybe not as far separate, but you will hear from people that maybe say that the YWCA didn't meet their needs, or the Family Justice Center didn't meet their needs. And some are like, you guys are amazing. You helped us a ton. A lot of it is personal perception. Some of it is, what provider they're working with. I don't know that we can ever get to a place where every single person will be happy, but we're going to keep working towards doing better and tweaking and refining our processes. And when we hear from survivors, we take that feedback and then try to, look into best practices and reconcile the two and make the system as effective as we can.
Just one other follow-up, please. Do you feel that from an observational point of view and anecdotally, things are getting better or worse?
Councilmember O'Donnell, I believe that the way the system functions is getting better. We've made a lot of progress with the Family Justice Center and the relationships. I've known Officer Nash and Prosecutor Halverson and Prosecutor Licks and Jen for many years, and we've worked together. But the work that we've been able to do in the last 2 years is truly groundbreaking. I maybe not groundbreaking, but it is for Montana. I would say that the City of Billings, YWCA, the Family Justice Center, and the DV unit are the gold standard right now in Montana for victim services. And I would also say that anecdotally, we are hearing from fewer people that had negative experiences with law enforcement than we did before all of this started. And then another anecdotal kind of piece that would take too much to go through and really find out, but just based on notes and seeing what calls are coming in, that the number of referrals that we're getting from law enforcement and law enforcement facilitated sheltering has increased significantly since we started this partnership. So I think we're moving in the right direction as far as what we can control and what we can do. As far as domestic violence, I don't know that has, I don't think domestic violence has changed because I think that's a much deeper rooted challenge that really nothing that any of us up here can make that go away. We can just try to make it better and try to prevent the next generation from falling into the same cycles by getting them out and getting them safe.
Thank you. I just wanted to say one last thing is that at the first meeting, it seemed like there were a lot of women who were saying, please help me. And I'm wondering what the city can do to actually respond to those things other than what's going on right now. So thank you.
I'm sorry. And I will say I misunderstood you. I thought you said the police helped me, not please help me. So I answered in a law enforcement context.
No, some people did say police helped me. Others said the police did not help. They were impediment situation, which may be just people's natural response to somebody in a uniform, authority type of thing. They react the wrong way. I'm not saying anything about the police department one way or the other, but anyway, that's your last answer was very helpful to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. O'Donnell. Thanks to you too. Appreciate it. Anything else for our presenters? Okay. Mr. Iflin, I think we have 3 more topics here and 18 minutes.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. So it looks like we got a lot of stats that you want to see come back to you. So we'll work on that and stuff. And then if you're agreeable, we'll start on the next section of it. That's probably all we'll get for today. We did, all along plan on bringing in outside partners in this too. So that'll be kind of coming up in the future agenda, such as the Sheriff's Department, if they're willing, 911 center stuff and things of that nature. So with that, we've got the dedicated DV and response capacity. And I think it's Officer Katie Nash and Captain Krivitz, if I'm not mistaken, that are going to cover those things. So I'll turn it over to them.
All that I have to present to council is, I guess, a refresher that the police department has 2 full-time domestic violence investigators. The grant that the police department receives pays for overtime funds for officers who are on a domestic violence investigation team. They work the equivalent of like 1/3 full-time employee throughout the year. Outside of that, we are working with the SWAT team to develop a high-risk response protocol for warrants. So our high-risk offenders who have warrants, that is able to be implemented in the very near future. It will need refining. Outside of that, I'm curious if there are specific questions about capacity. I don't really know where else to go with this conversation without some more specific questions.
So as it always is, this falls on the cop on the street. I actually had no training as a cop. You guys have training, but is it once when they get signed on? Is it every week? Is it once a month? How do you ensure that they're still participating? Do you follow up on some of their activities and say you did a good job here or you didn't do a good job here? Because it goes right back to the guy on the street, the person on the street doing the job.
Yes, Councilmember Boyette, that's a great point. It does come to patrol officers. The fewer officers we have who can respond and spend time on scene, the more time I have to spend almost in damage control to make sure the cases are very, very solid. So if we had more patrol officers who could really focus not on the calls that they're hearing coming in, but focus on scene, I think we would see even better police responses. Because they would have more time to spend with victims or to spend with the people on scene. The academy does training for our new guys. We do scenario-based training when they first get started, which includes some domestic violence response. The contract for the Family Justice Center calls for the police department to do 4 hours of continuing training throughout the year. That could be a 4-hour chunk. It could be 8 half-hour chunks during in-service training. And we very specifically left that vague so that we can tailor it to what we need. So we do, as we review cases, the DV unit, myself and my partner, command staff, as we see cases come through, we do pick up on areas that are consistently problematic, areas that are consistently done very well. We do try to reach out to officers to say, great job, keep it up, or hey, this officer, this shift needs some work, whatever the issue is. And we can do updated training as often as necessary. We're happy to go to briefing and just do brief reminders, legal updates, that kind of thing. So we do it as necessary. It's not limited to once a year, for sure not limited to initial hiring date and then nothing else.
So you mentioned the high-risk response unit. So what goes into that? Can you give us a few details?
Yes. So my understanding is that it would not be a full-scale SWAT call-out. It would be some members of the SWAT team would review through their risk matrix, in addition to potentially the risk assessment, some crime analytics that our crime analyst can pull through our records management system to really create a risk matrix that would dictate this list of offenders is high risk, potentially too high risk just to have a patrol officer go try to make the arrest. The SWAT team would be willing to do small scale call outs to effect the arrest with their specialized training. We're working through the process of how to compile that information in a user-friendly way so that it's not a spreadsheet and a system and a person having to pull that information and review it, so that process, right now it's a spreadsheet. We can refine that process later, but we can roll it out very soon based on the spreadsheet. We have a light duty officer who is reviewing active warrants to see who might fall into that high risk category. So it's doable now, it's refinable later.
You mentioned time on scene. Is this, do you have the evidence unit come out? I'm sorry, I forget what we're calling them, but do they come out and are they part of this process or not?
Mayor, good question. They are not. Any kind of crime scene processing would be for major crimes, but not for partner family member assaults. If it was domestic violence related and a major crime, they potentially could. But patrol officers have the training and the skills to handle most of these cases. The things that are above and beyond their capacity come to myself and my partner. Outside of that, patrol guys handle it. They do photography, evidence collection, and that kind of thing. Above and beyond that would be a detective call out.
I see. The title on our sheet here is Dedicated Domestic Violence Response Capacity. Do we have numbers on what our capacity is now? I know that there's 2 of you and we have the patrol units, but you know, in numbers, in raw numbers, are we ever overwhelmed, or is this a day Or we can do 12 a day, or, I mean, how do we measure this?
So Mayor, if I could just interject here, maybe the best way to approach this is our current model of police officers on the street, on patrol, responding to the first calls for domestic violence. Is that a good method to have? And I think the dedicated DV is, or do we need dedicated officers that are doing nothing but going to DV calls? So I think that will
A
answer.
good way to
kind of
boil
where
it
you're-
down, yeah.
I believe that our current system is the best practice system, where we would have patrol officers on their beat, on their shift, responding to the calls in progress. Having a specialized unit to respond to each one would be, I believe, a huge staffing issue. It would have to be a very large unit, 3 shifts deep.
Okay, all right. Mr. Aspenleiter.
Yeah, this is around the training question again. I mean, I know what our MOU said with the why about 4 hours of training. How are we tracking that for every officer? Like, are we just saying, hey, we're getting 4 hours and we're assuming that you're getting it at shift change? Like, how are we checking it per officer, per badge number?
Yes, Councilmember Aspenleiter, we have sign-in sheets. So if we do roll call trainings, we know who is present at the roll call trainings. A couple years ago, we did a 4-hour block of training. Those officers got post credit, so continuing education credit, I believe, and a sign-in sheet to say they were present.
Okay, so the next question, is command staff also doing that? Like, and I'm talking about all the way up to the chief. Are we doing it? Are we stopping at patrol level, or are we doing this all the way up to command chain?
I believe it's just at the patrol level, patrol sergeants, patrol lieutenants, but the administrators are not necessarily going to that training.
All right. And therein lies part of the problem from my perspective. Even in my small team, my guys pay attention when my ass is sitting in the seat next to them. And it's a different reaction sometimes when they're on their own. And I think if we're going to sit here and say that we're serious about impacting how we're going to do this in our community, then every damn officer, including the chief, needs to have his butt in that seat through those trainings with the guys that are on the street. That's the only way that this is ever going to be taken seriously from everybody on the force from the top down, is when they see the guy at the top also in the seats and in the training with them. And if we aren't going to commit to doing that at the administrative level and at the upper levels of the chain of command level, then we're never going to get the effectiveness that we want. And I'm not saying that there isn't a significant portion of your crew that takes this serious. There is. But there's also that third that you just have a hard time touching. And so, to me, if we're going to set the example has to come from the top, and we got to do it from the top down too.
Mayor and council, can I respond to that?
Yes.
I wholeheartedly disagree that there's a third that doesn't take this seriously. Every one of our officers take this seriously, including upper command all the way up to the chief. The reason why the administrators and chiefs aren't going to this training is because we're not responding to calls for service. So our time on the streets is done. We're not the ones that are going out and handling these investigations. But every single one of our, from command down, we take this very seriously. And I wouldn't say that there's a third that we're not touching.
We're going to disagree on that, but that's okay.
Councilman Pittman.
So, Mayor, I'm just going to jump ahead real quick, if it's all right, to the legislative component, because we only have a few minutes left. I just have a quick question that maybe you guys can answer.
If you're going to do that, before you do it, let's let Mr. Neese wrap this up, and then if we have time, we'll move in.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually agree with Councilmember Aspenleiter. I think it's really important that senior management gets all the training. Maybe they're not going to be every quarter or every month or whatever it is, but they're going to be involved in the training so that they understand know what what the people they expect them to do. And so I would agree with that training needs to be all the way up to the chief. I mean, if he only wants to be trained once a year, I would probably say something that's fine, but I think that the training needs to be throughout the entire organization.
All right. Any other questions for our presenters on this topic? Ms. Shaw.
I do have one. I agree as well. Actually, I think just having them in the room, I think is a helpful benefit. But I appreciate your response also that there isn't anyone who doesn't take it seriously. So that's great to hear. I want to go back to SWAT really quick, just so I'm clear about this. Isn't a case of like people calling in requesting the SWAT team to come, right? This is identified within the department of these are active high risk warrants, and then you're making that determination. Is that accurate?
Councilmember Shaw, yes, that is correct. It would be an inward facing list that our prosecutors work through, saying this is an active warrant, these are the risk factors. The crime analyst pulls additional information about multiple potentially unrelated offenses, but if it's a problematic person in the community, and then the SWAT team has their matrix to determine internally, does this person go on the high risk domestic violence warrant list?
Okay. Yes. The reason I'm asking that is because we will undoubtedly get calls saying, what's going on in my neighborhood? There was three police officers showed up and what's happening? So just so I have an idea of how to explain that to people, that's helpful. Thanks.
All right. How's our time doing? Okay, we have a few minutes. Mr. Pittman?
So this question is about legislation, because we can only do what we can do. And I pulled up the domestic misdemeanor violent crimes page on our website. And I think one of the questions we have to ask is what can the city do? And how do we manage those expectations? Because I think people think we can do more than we can do. And I've been part of this process through some personal experiences. And it's frustrating because really on a city level, we're really dealing with just misdemeanors. And it seems to be a system that is cogged up in, you have to have 3 misdemeanors on the same thing on this within a certain period of time before it gets kicked into a felony, which has heavier ramifications and resources to it. So I guess as we're going forward, it's the real important conversation is, I'm not sure all the time, it's easy to say that we failed, but sometimes we did all we could do with those things. And all of a sudden people are coming in and going, but I reported it and it's a misdemeanor. And so as part of the legislative committee and as part of us going forward, we've started to have some of these conversations on how do we escalate some of these things so that they're not just a misdemeanor, that it doesn't take 3 times of the same thing and almost killing somebody or ultimately having that result that gets things going.
Councilmember Pittman, excuse me, if I can answer that really quickly. So I would say on balance, having gotten back from a conference in Texas, that Montana has very advanced and model statutes for our domestic violence prosecutions. For example, our stalking statute is based on the model statute that was updated in 2019. Strangulation had been a long fight up until 2017. That penalty was originally a 20-year max in prison with a 2-year minimum. That was reduced to just a simple 5-year max with no mandatory minimum. When we wrote the new stalking statute, we contemplated a 10-year max that reverted back to what it is now, which is a 5-year max. So these are efforts we made, and some in vain. The statute being in place, I would say, is the most important part, but the penalties are certainly need to be addressed. The Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission has long suggested and encouraged legislators to make a second offense, partner family member assault, a felony offense. I think the problems that we run into going down that road is the fiscal note and the pushback from the prison system and the Office of the Public Defender. A lot of good legislation, at least since I've been paying attention to it, has died because of that reason alone.
So, Councilmember Pittman, as you know, that's the last item on our topic there, and we've got about 2 or 3 pages of legislation issues to talk about. So
So the question of the council is, should we schedule another meeting or do you want to soldier through? We will schedule another meeting? Okay. All right. So, Mr. Iflin, why don't we talk about when we can do that?
What did the last time when Juliet kind of pulled all you guys, you know, I mean, and then kind of put that together? That's the only way I think that it's going to be efficient to maybe get a date set.
All right. I think though, from conversations I had with the council, I know the scheduling this time was a little rough, but if we could bump it up so that there's not so much time in between these meetings.
I will ask Juliet to schedule it as soon as possible. I mean, the earliest date we can get on the calendar.
All right. Next for you, Mr. Iflin, can you just quickly go through the points you think that we want further follow-up on from today?
Yeah, I think, you know, some of the generalities, we will be trying to bring in some outside agencies, you know, for further discussions on this. And I know several were talked about here, you know, including county attorney's office. We'll bring some 911 information and things like that back. On the risk assessment, we've got kind of the case review assessment that Katie Nash talked about, comparison to best practices, the declination rate for those risk assessments. A lot of stats here, obviously. Stats on the Family Justice Center calls, call volume, if we can do days, weekends, anything like that, that we can bring back to you. Some 911 kind of stats that we need to bring back and referral stats. And then I don't know if Jessica has anything. She's been trying to keep better notes than I do.
Just additional statistics on referrals and follow through with services was what I had with that.
Anything else that I missed?
I think Mr. Neese might have something.
I have a question because today we covered victim advocacy, but we only heard from the YWCA. We haven't heard from Angelic Piazza. We haven't heard from all these other advocacy groups. Are we going to invite them to share what they're doing and how they can be a part of that?
I think that was part of the outside agencies that Mr. Iflin mentioned, and I do think that we could.
That's something that I was actually just going to bring up because we have 2 topics left on our discussion topics, and we have repeatedly been discussing the fact that we need to bring other partners in and have these discussions, and so we need to make those invitations. There are a lot of different agencies that we could invite and some that we definitely should invite, and so maybe we should get some feedback from you today before we close because we have 2 topics left, so maybe we will have time to have some outside entities involved. I think it's really important to at least invite the courts. The courts are the biggest entity involved here, and certainly they may decline that invitation, but it would be great to have them involved. Just as an example, I think that to express why it's so important to have the courts involved, we just this week we had a jury trial scheduled. We had 2 jury trials scheduled on Tuesday, and one was a traffic case and one was a domestic violence case. The court certainly controls its docket, but the court chose the case that was the traffic case to go to trial. And there are a lot of considerations there. The domestic violence case was older, speedy trial would run sooner, so it was our opinion the domestic violence case should have gone. The safety considerations should have been considered. There are a lot of factors that went into that decision, so I think inviting the courts is important, but I think it's important to get your feedback as to who we should invite to that next meeting. I think if we schedule 2 hours, there certainly should be time for that. So
we
just
would
want some
have,
feedback on that.
on the next meeting, then if we invited the courts, we'd have the violence fatality review, discussion over your many pages of legislative considerations, and then the courts.
And I don't know if you want to invite the county attorney's office, the sheriff's office.
Yeah.
The sheriff's office would include the
Yeah,
jail,
I think
so-
that's good, and that would be a good agenda for the next meeting. We could probably fill up 5 hours with that 2-hour time lot.
Sorry. I'm skeptical we can get through all of that in 2 hours. I think, yes, I would love to have these meetings with all these entities. I just don't want to invite the sheriff's office and have them sit here for 2 hours and then we don't get to them.
All right.
Be my only concern.
In that group, where would you like to start?
In courts for me.
Courts it is. I like courts.
I just be careful. I mean, you got a municipal court, a justice court, and a district court.
Well, I don't
and
suspect they will all come, but I think if we could get a
every
representative.
one of them will talk for 2 hours if you
Right.
invite them.
We could speak with the district court judges. If any of them is willing to come, maybe it would just be one as a representative. We'll see what we can do. They all may decline, frankly. We don't know who will want to come.
So if I can make just a suggestion, we'll do the domestic violence fatality review, the legislative, I'll invite municipal court. I think we did get a commitment that the chief district court judge would be interested in coming to this meeting.
Great.
And that would probably fill our 2 hours very easily.
All right. I like that. Okay. Thank you. All right. We have come to the end of our meeting where we have public comment on non-agenda items. This is your opportunity to speak to only items not on this agenda. You'll get 3 minutes. Please come up, give us your name and address, and take your 3 minutes.
Jordan Weber, Ward 1. And I will not speak to the stuff on the agenda, but I will speak to something that you guys have touched on repeatedly tonight. And I would like to applaud you for being interested in data and metrics and seeing the numbers show. They are a powerful tool that can enable you to see where change is happening, where it needs to happen, where we are succeeding, where we are failing. I have a decade's worth of professional experience in analytics, and here's the problem. My starting compensation package would be about $125,000 a year. So every time you're asking these small agencies for, oh, I'd like data on this, I'd like data on this, I'd like data on this, you're asking them to fabricate or to try to fulfill the role of a full profession that they can't afford. So that is something to discuss. If you want these data points and you want to be able to ask the question, like how many calls are you getting? What's the transference rate? What is the conversion rate? What is retention rate? What is this, and this? Those are positions for full-time analysts. Those are questions for full-time analysts. And you have those questions and that's good. But if you want them answered, I think a conversation you might need to be having is how are you going to empower these small agencies to do that? Because I know Billings proper has analysts and has that infrastructure, but it's small nonprofits 9 times out of 10 don't. So I encourage you to keep asking those questions, to keep pushing and looking for those metrics, but also spend some time thinking, how are you going to make it possible for these groups you're asking to do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Any other public comment? All right, I'll close the public comment portion of this meeting. Seeing nothing else from the council, we are adjourned. Thank you.